Greetings, Namibia, and welcome from wherever you are around the country. Thank you so much for making the time to spend a little bit of your time with us today. We've been getting a lot of inquiries from some of you with regards to how is economic recovery going, what's happened since the launch of the HPP2, and of course, everybody's favorite these days, what is this green hydrogen story about, and what's actually happening, and how does that actually then benefit all of us here as Namibians? So before I then now start diving into a lot of the details, I figured let us maybe just take each other through a bit of a short journey just to understand where we've come from and indeed where it is that we're looking to go. So as you would hopefully remember, on the 18th of March 2021, obviously our president went ahead and launched the Harambee Prosperity Plan in the middle of State House. Since then, we've been hard at work. We put together essentially an invitation to the world to come to Namibia and tender for the opportunity to do a feasibility study and essentially ultimately to build multi-billion-dollar plants here in Namibia, starting with, of course, in the Karas region, but later on I will tell you that we have plans to actually build some of these assets as well in the Erongo region and possibly in the Kunene region as well. And so by the 3rd of August, of course, on His Excellency's birthday, we went ahead and launched this RFP, this Global Request for Proposal. A few weeks later, on the 16th of September, Namibia received its first commercial offers from 6 developers from around the world, some of them regionally and some of them local. And of course, those 6 developers gave us 9 actual proposals. Since then, we've now been very hard at work going through some of these proposals. Some of them are 800 pages long, others are even larger. And as you can imagine, we want to make sure that we're doing a good job for you, of course, our citizens, in order to make sure that we're picking the right partner and the right winner. The aspiration and the hope at the moment is that come COP26 in the beginning of November, we should be announcing to you and of course to everyone else around the world who those particular developers could be. And of course, from there, that will then allow them to start investing in Namibia, to start actually dropping the cash in your neighborhoods and begin to hire some of you to really, really get the economy going. And so that's a bit of a timeline and a recap that looks at, A, where are we with the economic recovery plan? And of course, in particular, with the Southern Corridor Development Initiative. Because a lot of us, I know, are very passionate about green hydrogen. Of course, I am no exception. But the real big picture is the SCDI, the Southern Corridor Development Initiative. And I'll talk to you now a little bit about what does that Southern Corridor Development Initiative actually entail. So let's start. We've been told by some estimates and by some professionals that indeed the SCDI could attract more than $12 billion in foreign direct investment, not just into the Karas region, but into the country as a whole. $12 billion is a lot of money. It is more than actually our GDP, which currently stands at about $11.8, $11.5 billion US dollars, depending on which estimate you look at. So what exactly are those assets? Well, let's start. We now both know that we have a lot of very good wind and a lot of very good solar resources in the Karas region, okay? Especially in that Spiegelbad National Park, which we've opened up for developers to come and start building some of these assets. Now, in order to capture that renewable energy, we are going to need to build generation assets. That's now the solar panels and the solar farms together with the wind farms that will now start to capture and harness that renewable energy, that legendary renewable energy, I should say, that we have in that particular region. So that's really part A. Once you begin to generate that electricity, all manner of possibilities start opening up. First things first, we would like to capture some of that electricity and pump it into a machine we're calling an electrolyzer. Essentially, that electrolyzer takes this electricity and of course puts it in a water solution and is able to split up the hydrogen from the oxygen molecules found in water. But wait, before we even get to this water, this clean water that we're separating, we must actually find water. We know that Namibia does not have a lot of water and we suffer from droughts. So where are we going to get this water? We're going to use a big machine called a desalination plant to take seawater, purify it, reduce the salt content, etc. And then we're going to zap that water with the electricity that we're now getting from the solar farms and the wind farms. Once you start separating the hydrogen from the oxygen, one mustn't forget about that oxygen. We need to explore possibility of capturing some of that oxygen and using it in other manufacturing processes, such as green steel manufacturing processes, or possibly even in hospitals. We all know that we were running out of oxygen at the height of the COVID pandemic. So don't forget about that oxygen. The hydrogen, what can we do with the hydrogen? Well, you could start combining that hydrogen with things like ammonia, obviously, that we said we can, with things like nitrogen that we said we can capture from the air, right? So using an air separation unit, you can capture the nitrogen, combine it with the hydrogen, and start making things like ammonia. So far we've told this story before, but of course we just want to recapture it here for all of you that have missed it the first time. Now, ammonia is the start. What can you do with ammonia? Actually, Namibia is one of 2 countries in Africa that has a fertilizer manufacturing plant. The fertilizer is actually typically used with ammonia as a base. You can make all sorts of different compounds of fertilizer, but ammonia is a key ingredient. So imagine a scenario where we're taking our own homemade ammonia, putting it in a fertilizer manufacturing process, and then making green fertilizer and taking that into, say, large state-owned farms that we would love to, of course, infuse private sector capital and know-how as well, such as Neckartal Dam or the Neckartal Green Scheme, and of course the Tangiskopi in the south as well. And slowly but surely you're beginning to see the picture of the SCDI coming together. It's not just the green hydrogen, it's making use of things like ammonia to make fertilizer, and taking that to these 2 large farms in the south as well, and beginning to decarbonize your agricultural process. Now let's go back a little bit. Remember we said that we were going to make a significant amount of renewable electricity. Can you imagine if we could capture some of that electricity? Perhaps we're producing more than we even need in Namibia, and we could export that into the Southern African power pool. So that's a big part of the puzzle that we're now looking to solve with these developers as well. We would love to use renewable electricity from Namibia to begin to reduce the carbon emissions of the region. What are these carbon emissions? At the moment, for example, if you just look at Scorpion Zinc, they use a lot of electricity, right, to purify zinc oxide to then, zinc sulfide and zinc oxide to then make purified zinc and cell. They use about, I think, 180 megawatts at their peak production. That electricity is generated from coal-fired power stations from South Africa. Of course, as you use the coal to create that electricity, you're reducing carbon and pollution in the air, and that of course contributes to global warming, and that contributes to climate change, and that's why we're getting very erratic weather conditions, and of course we're also getting things like prolonged droughts, etc. Again, you're beginning to see just how inclusive and wide the Southern Corridor Development Initiative is. So renewable electricity going into the Scorpion Zinc facility can help us make green zinc as well. That is another export that of course could go up in price because it's being produced by renewable electricity. So far we're already making green fertilizer, and we're beginning to make green zinc, and of course we're exporting green electricity into the Southern African power pool. Okay, now what about the molecules? The electricity, people call that electrons. The molecules is now where you can make ammonia, green hydrogen, that you can actually put in a gel called a liquid organic hydrogen carrier, and you can export that. But of course, let's not forget our own neighbors. Right to the north, we have Angola, who obviously use hydrogen and other synthetic fuels in their refining process. And of course, to the south, we have South Africa, which is essentially the largest producer of gray hydrogen in the world in the form of Sasol, right? And Sasol and South Africa have committed to decarbonizing Sasol and getting to be carbon neutral by 2050. So Sasol will have a great deal of demand for green hydrogen. So you can imagine a scenario where we could build our own green hydrogen assets in the Karas region and exporting some of that green hydrogen into the Northern Cape and later on all the way to Secunda. There, we will then need to construct a pipeline. Some of the designs we have seen involve pipelines that are 2,300 kilometers long and entail the deployment of about 6.4 billion euros. Namibians, that is a significant investment and a significant undertaking. And so now you're beginning to see what the Southern Corridor development is as it begins to really put together all these different assets. But wait, we're actually not done. At the moment, we are trucking manganese in from South Africa and exporting it through the Lüderitz port. And Scorpion Zinc might be very well looking to start bringing zinc sulfide oxide also from South Africa to be refined in the Karas region. So can you imagine a scenario where we're bringing up zinc and we're bringing up manganese? The manganese goes out through the port, the zinc gets refined, and of course then that could get exported together with ammonia and the manganese as well. All of a sudden you can see that that port infrastructure will need to be uplifted, and of course the rail infrastructure that goes into that port coming from the northern part of South Africa will also need to be upgraded. That in itself also requires a significant amount of gross fixed capital formation, or in short, investments into infrastructure that will enable the evacuation of all these new products that we're trying to build just here in the southern part of Namibia. And so, ladies and gentlemen, when you start considering the evacuation assets, the manufacturing assets, and of course the generation assets, you can quickly begin to see how we end up with a figure north of 12 billion US dollars that will need to be deployed in order to make this catalytic vision of the Southern Corridor Development Initiative come true right here in our backyard. And if we were dreaming about all of this on our own, I would have been worried. But in fact, it seems that we're in extremely good company. And this next part of the conversation, I want to talk to you about who else wants to enable this sort of processes to happen. So we can start off obviously in North America. Joe Biden has put together an initiative called the Build Back Better World Initiative, where he went across the globe, gathered the G7 sort of countries, sort of the 7 largest economies in the world, and together they have all come and formed a pact and said, we really want to decarbonize the globe, and we're willing to throw a significant amount of effort, investment, and R&D to make that happen. If you go to the EU, you'll see that the EU has the Green EU 55 deal as well, and there's a commitment across the whole continent to decarbonize. If you come here at home, the African Union has its own green economic recovery plan as well. And so very quickly you're beginning to see that decarbonizing manufacturing or industrial processes is not a Namibian dream. It's not even a Southern African dream. It's indeed a global dream. And what Namibia has done is it has crafted a vision that is aligned with what the world is looking to do. And of course, we're going to be looking to absolutely make the most of that global momentum towards enabling a green industrial revolution, essentially. Now, to make all of these assets come to fruition, you will need to deploy a significant amount of capital. As we were mentioning, we've seen figures north of 12 billion US dollars. Where do you find all this money? Now, we know that Namibia has, sort of a rich dearth of pension fund assets that we could deploy, but really here we're also looking at attracting capital from outside of our country. And there is how, the next sort of step for us is to start to design instruments that can capture some of that money from around the world that is earmarked specifically for climate change, okay? A big part of that process is what we would like to go do at COP26. There, what we're expecting is for developed countries to make significant pledges to deploy and avail sustainable finance, so basically cheap money, to build assets that will help with fighting climate change. One entity that we have in Namibia that can really make the most of that opportunity is the Environmental Investment Fund. The EIF, of course, sits under the Ministry of Finance, but it is an accredited institution by the Global Climate Fund, which of course will collect money from a lot of these developed nations and look to deploy that into emerging market nations. So what do we then have to do as Namibians? Is we then have to begin to avail either businesses or infrastructure assets that can receive funding from the GCF via the Environmental Investment Fund, so that we can begin to deploy some of that cheap capital into our country. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you're beginning to see our ambition, right? We want to industrialize Namibia, just as was captured in Vision 2030, but we now want to do it in partnership with the globe, and we want to do it by deploying capital as well from overseas and partner that capital with our own money. And so, in a nutshell, that is the vision of the Southern Corridor Development Initiative. But where to from here? After we go to COP, we'll be looking to announce the winner of the RFP, but you would remember that we signed a joint communication of intent with our brothers and sisters from Germany. That particular agreement availed about 40 million euros to Namibia to use to essentially incubate the synthetic fuels industry. So we'll be looking to use some of that money to fund pilot plants, and not just in the south, but some pilot plants we think will be built actually in the Irongo region. And so that is one key area of interest that we're really looking at with a lot of curiosity. In the Irongo region, we have the Walvis Bay port, which is of course much deeper and much wider than what we have in Lüderitz, and we think we have the potential there to build multiple bulk liquid terminals. Right? So basically very large storage tanks which can house a lot of this either ammonia or other fuels. And then of course you start creating a whole new shipping line where global essentially traffic can come into Namibia, pick up these renewable fuels or these clean fuels and take them to other markets, okay? At the same time, we've started receiving proposals from companies such as HDF, for example, that want to build very, very innovative renewable energy plants that will be taking the sun and providing that renewable energy during the day, but storing excess energy in the form of hydrogen, which is then used to be deployed at night, giving you a very stable energy sort of signature and mitigating the risks of intermittency that typically is associated with renewable energy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that sort of ingenuity and technology deployment and research and development is something we haven't seen in Namibia for a long time. And we should welcome it, in my humble opinion, with open arms, because it really then begins to really sort of start talking about how do you start empowering locals as well. Which is why a core part of HPP2 and of course the SCDI is putting together the Namibian Green Hydrogen Research Institute. And that is where NAST and UNAM will be working together to pioneer the deployment of pilot plants, the deployment of research projects right across Namibia, so that we can actually start building cutting-edge solutions right here in our own country, and of course potentially begin to enable a manufacturing base to take hold as well. So ladies and gentlemen, that is what we're looking forward to in the future. Pilot plants in the Irongo, more feasibility plants possibly in Kunene as well. We think Kunene has beautiful renewable energy assets. They're very strategically placed right next to Angola and of course Zambia and Zimbabwe as well. And we think it's very possible that we build some of those evacuation assets we were talking about in terms of transmission lines or even pipelines to get some of these products into Angola as well. Of course, we're going to be looking to be deploying some students into some of these pilot plants and to deploy a scholarship program as well. And really, this is not going to take 5 years to do. We want to do this in the next 6 months. Just because we know that the economy does need an infusion of capital, it needs an infusion of confidence, and of course, it needs an infusion of hope as well. And so hopefully this video has given you a bit of a better idea of what the Southern Corridor Development is in relation to, yes, green hydrogen, and most importantly, in relation to our economic recovery plan. So thank you so much for joining me this time. And of course, we stand ready to continue to provide you with more information as your questions carry on. Thank you so much and see you next time.